Now it's time for the panel discussion, and the topic of the discussion is cultural D&I in the workplace, from policy to practice. Before we begin, let's give you some background on our panelists and moderators. For the panelists, we have Mr. Paul Choi, who I introduced earlier. We have Ms. Olivia Wong with us today. She is the Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Joan Swire & Sons Hong Kong Limited, a role that was newly created in August 2018. She is a passionate advocate for inclusion in the workplace and inclusive leadership, and is responsible for developing a coherent D&I strategy and aligning D&I initiatives across the Swire Group. Swire is one of the first conglomerates in the region to pioneer a dedicated role in D&I within the organization. We also have Mr. Tayyab Mohammed. He has been working with EY for 7 years. Currently, he's working as the manager, transfer pricing. His job duties involves a wide range of international tax and transfer pricing projects. He holds a bachelor degree in business administration, specializing in accountancy from City University of Hong Kong, and is also a member of Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants and Beta Gamma Sigma. In 2013, he was the first runner-up of EY Hong Kong Young Tax Professional of the Year. Ms. Tracy Srivastava is the next panelist for today. She's a product manager at Beyond, an online animation studio which allows users of any skill level to create videos. She was born and brought up in Hong Kong. Tracy is passionate about diversity and inclusion related initiatives. Last year, she was a member of the Zubin Foundation's Diversity List, a list of ethnic minorities under the age of 35 who are nominated to serve on Hong Kong government advisory bodies. She is also an active member in the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Committee in her current company. Last but not least, we have Mr. Jones Law. He's a mechanical engineer with 3 years of experience working in a biomedical technology firm, Nisai Hong Kong Limited. Jones has specialized in mechanical design and is responsible for surgical robot R&D projects. Jones is also an active member of Equal Opportunities and Diversity Committee in the company. I have introduced all the panelists. Now it's time for our moderator, who is Mr. Paul Arkwright. He's the publisher and editor-in-chief of Excel Media Group Limited, with over 25 years of publishing experience. Paul has been organizing and facilitating international events with senior HR, finance, IT, and government figureheads across APAC for the past 2 decades. He heads the team at Excel Media Group. As publisher and editor-in-chief for HR Magazine, Paul runs regular HR conferences, live streams, and chairs panel discussions on HR around the world. He has interviewed hundreds of HR leaders and senior government officials in Hong Kong. For the audience, just to let you know that during the panel discussion, you can send your questions to the panelists via the Q&A chat box that is at the bottom. The questions will be answered at the end of the discussion. But just be reminded that we will try to answer as many questions as possible depending on the time. And now we can begin the panel discussion. So I will pass the time on to our moderator, Mr. Paul Arkwright.
Thank you so much, Huma. And I just want to do a quick sound check on Paul, just to make just to make sure that we can hear you properly.
Can you hear me clearly now?
That's much better.
Yes,
that's
better.
Making everybody feel much happier now. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in here. We've got tons of questions to go through, and do feel free to post your questions as well. If I see some interesting ones come up, I'll pop those into the mix as well. And like Huma said, we'll save some time at the end for that too. So Paul and Olivia, I'm going to talk to you two first, okay, because you both work for sizable organizations. And I want to ask you, what you think is the sort of main driver for diversity and inclusion policies at your organizations. And there's a lot of debate, particularly for multinationals, as to whether the D&I initiatives should be locally based or should they be driven from the headquarters, wherever that might be? So I want to get your take on that. So Paul, if I come to you first.
Sure. Well, I think it has to be driven by two things. One is the external factors, the other is internal to the organization. In my speech, unfortunately, you can't hear, but there are a lot of external factors that drive the need to have a better or even more complete D&I policies in place. Internally, our company has our corporate culture and values, which is not invented by anyone senior, but it's actually from all the employees, that they think diversity actually represents how we do our business and how we interact with others within the organization and with the community. So I think if I would say external factors would definitely be a big driver of such policies, but also internally, we have to do something that's consistent with the culture of the company. Last but not least is I don't think any D&I policies or any policies in reality can be driven without a proper senior support. So the support from in HAEX, from the board members, from our management committee team, etc., is very strong. So I think that will be another driving factors that push us to have better policies.
Great. And Olivia, you're at SWI. What's your take on that one?
Well, first, I mean, I echo what Paul said, is that I think it is really important that you need senior management support. I think without that, basically, I mean, it's not that it's not possible, but I think if you're only depending on the grassroots, I think that's tough. I think answer that question in terms of, why, D&I seems to be really important. I mean, I think it's always been, I think now it's kind of more front and center, is that, I mean, aside from the fact that everybody will tell you it's the right thing to do, which it is, I think it's also very pragmatic if I look from a business perspective. I mean, ultimately, until the day that robot takes over the world and they do everything, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to depend on human. And so when we depend on a human being, we need to go and recruit talent. And that's basically a competition. And I think nowadays, especially, like we recruit young graduates in every year. And when you talk to them, the language of, inclusion and diversities and, whether it's talking about racial equalities or sexual orientation, it's something that they've been growing up with. It's things that they can't understand why we're still talking about it. And so I think in order for us to attract these talents, it is really important that we are able to address the concerns that they have and show them that we are a company that you should join, because we also care about diversity and inclusion. And I think in terms of whether, yes, I mean, I suppose for Swire, we are a conglomerate, and, with our headquarters for Swire Pacific in Hong Kong, a lot of our companies also have business elsewhere in the world. And I think it is really important that while we do have a central strategies in terms of looking at diversity and inclusion, we must respect each of the geography and the business that they operate in terms of what they see as a priority. What are the things that they need to work on? Even when we talk about things like racial equality, with Black Lives Matter in the US, they will see this very different from, say, in Hong Kong, how we see racial equality. And so I think, with that, although, yes, I think we should have a central strategy, but I think it is very important to respect geography and respect the industry that the companies are operating in terms of prioritizing.
Okay, great. So it's really a combination of factors, both not just being employee driven, but also you've got to get that senior level support in there from the board. And it's also very closely linked to the culture of the organization, which can help with bringing the best talent on board. And although it may be a HQ-centric model that's rolled out, it's important to have that level of localization so that you can prioritize what's important for each of the different industries in there. So I want to broaden it out a bit more now, because all of that sounds good on paper, but sometimes it's very difficult to actually do these things, particularly for HQ-centric sort of messages that are coming through. It's actually difficult to roll these out practically on the ground in different locations. So I'm going to bring in Tayeb, Tracy, and Jones now to get your take in terms of, in sort of 30 seconds, just give us a quick overview one by one in terms of your companies, the sort of size of your company, what industry, and the diversity that you've got within your own organizations. You all are cultural minorities yourself. So what sort of challenges did you have in terms of getting into your organization and in terms of getting traction, settling in your organization? And to what extent did your organization help you with that journey? So I'll come to Tayeb first of all for that one.
Thank you, Paul. So in terms of challenges, it goes back to as a student. So when I was studying at City University, I was similar to my peers in the university. I was also applying for jobs, but then I applied over 100 opportunities, and then it's very rare for me to get any interview. So all I got is less than 5 interviews. And then one particular example I still remember is that I was invited to an interview where in a group setting, there were more than 7-8 people. I was sitting among them, and the first question I was asked is, can you speak Chinese? And when I said I don't, I was told, oh, okay, this interview is for Chinese speaking people, and this job requires Chinese skills. So we would like you to, do you want to stay here or do you want to leave? So that was like pretty embarrassing. Although that job description didn't say anything related to Chinese language skills. So this was one of the experience. So now getting into EY, and the way I got into EY is rather untraditional. I joined a Young Techs Professional competition with over 100 people, and I got the first runner-up. So as part of the prize, I was offered a position at EY. Since I joined EY, I've been working. I would say I'm really lucky to be part of the EY team because I got a great boss and an excellent counselor who shaped my career in the past 7 years. They gave me a lot of opportunities, although it's challenging as well, but it developed my career. And then in terms of what EY is doing, EY has diversity and inclusive network. And then EY has signed the charter. EY is looking at our religious needs as well. Like, for example, we have a multi-faith room coming up where we voice out that we need somewhere to sit quietly or pray, etc. So they hear us, and then they are taking actions. And then in addition to that, we have a cultural diversity network coming up, which is going to reach outward to the community.
Okay, great. So it's good to hear that EY are on the ball in terms of facilitating all of that. Let's go to Tracy at Vion. Tell me a bit more about your organization and your sort of journey there.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So Vion is, we're in the tech industry, so we're an online animated video software, which caters to users of different skill levels in making videos. And we have about 100+ people in the organization. In terms of diversity, I'd say while the majority of the people are local, we do hire people from diverse backgrounds for various positions. For me personally, I think as a cultural minority, I had more trouble around finding a suitable job rather than settling into my existing organization. So quite similar to Tayeb's experience, a lot of the jobs these days, they require Chinese as a mandatory language. So that really affected my eligibility for some roles that I was interested in. And I feel that if you apply to more international organizations, it does help, because if you have branches outside Hong Kong, there's a higher chance that people are more flexible with your language requirements, as English is the commonly spoken language. So in that case, my current organization, because it's also an international organization, only English is required, and everyone speaks in English during meetings, and they're generally quite nice. And even if it's just a casual conversation, they will happily switch languages, make sure you feel included. So settling in hasn't been difficult. It's been a pretty positive experience.
Okay, let's get Jones's take on this. You're at NICE, the biomed company. Tell me about your journey there.
So I was working in NICE, and it is a startup about medical technology. So we built medical robot. Although we are a startup, we only have about 60 to 70 people, but we try our best to include many nationalities as possible, despite we have limited resources. So we will include different minorities from our interview, and we have a dedicated community to review our diversity and inclusion policy once in a while. And we would also like to have some group activity every month to let all the employees to come together and talk to each other. And in addition, we understand that a lot of people would have difficult language barrier when they communicating with a Chinese person, for example. So we have a regular Mandarin lesson for any people who would like to improve and overcome their language barrier. And also, of course, when we are meeting, we try our best to speak in English to include everyone in the meetings.
Okay, great. Well, I've got several questions coming in. I'm going to try and take as many of these as I can. The first one I'm putting up now is looking at your D&I initiatives, okay, that have been happening during COVID-19 this year. Obviously, it's thrown up, it's made it very difficult to do, or it's made it more challenging to do sort of interactive activities. So if any of you would like to pick up on that and let me know, what specifically have you done, or how has it affected your D&I policy during the last sort of, or it's coming up for a year now almost, of COVID-19 affecting us? If anyone wants to take that, you can put your hand up. Paul, first.
Yep, I can give it a try. HAEX this year, we take a very brave move that we actually launched a whole series of education sessions for all levels, especially for the junior people and also the managers, to understand how they could live diversity and inclusion in HAEX. Originally, it's planned to be done live. However, because of COVID, we changed it to over, we call it WebEx, which is similar to Zoom. And the way that we did it by careful consideration is we turned the whole program into a acting scene. So we have some actors and actresses actually get together virtually and act out scenarios on the screen, and people can react to the scenarios by using voting buttons, etc. So the participation has been actually better engaged than their life, because we actually know that they're responding individually to the scenarios, and they also put in responses. As a result, we attract also more than 70 to 80% of our employees, target employees, attended this training, and people talked about it. So we tried that. So it's not undoable, but we just need to be heavily planned ahead.
Okay, anyone else do anything slightly different? Olivia?
Yeah. I mean, I think what Paul said is great in terms of virtual, and I think it's important. But I think one of the things that we found, and I think in a way I see it as a silver lining, is because we don't have the opportunity to do a lot more events, which people generally think that doing D&I is doing a lot of events, that we end up actually spending a lot of time really looking at the foundation. So we're spending time to review our policies in terms of our HR policies. And we talk a lot around, how do we make sure that we are able to recruit or retain people that are diverse and that feel included. Well, one of the key things first is to look at our foundational policies, our HR policies. Is the language inclusive? Are we able to make sure that when people are, when they're reading our policies, that it's transparent, that is fair, that regardless of the background that you're in, that you look at it and go, okay, yeah, that I can see how it can apply to me. And I think those are really key things that generally, and again, going back, I don't think any company, in Hong Kong, would be having any policy that's actually discriminatory. But I think it's often is that we have policies that's been around for many years, and sometimes it's good to take a look at the language. Maybe what was right 20 years ago, the language is no longer applicable, and maybe it is time to kind of take a look and say, hey, we should take a look at it. And also I think even things like recognizing different forms of family units, that it's no longer the traditional husband and wife and children. We got to recognize that there are different forms of family unit as well that we need to look at. And so I think this has given us an opportunity to do a lot of foundational work, which I think it will really help us once, things, whatever that new normal looks like, that we can then, go full steam ahead.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much to Crystal for that question. And we've got another one on what you were just speaking about there, Olivia. So I'm going to interject with this one now from Simeon. It says, I'll just put it on the screen. It says, I see more companies reporting figures showing diversity, but I'm concerned, first of all, whether there really is inclusion, or is it just numbers in the D&I report? And the so-called diversity is mainly focused on gender, on male and female, but much less in terms of racial or ethnic mix. This is particularly apparent, says the questionnaire, in senior management roles. I wonder if the speakers could comment on this. What do you do to measure different aspects of D&I, and is measuring it meaning you actually have it? How do you actually know that you have it? So who'd like to take that challenging question there? No one.
I can try again if
Olivia, I'll come back to you first.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it's a great question because we ask that all the time. I think diversity in terms of numbers and gender is probably one of the easier one that you can kind of measure quantitatively. So what we look at in terms of inclusion, you use things like engagement survey. I think that's one of the way of looking at it. And I would love to hear what other people use as well. So we look at engagement survey because what it actually says is that when we look at engagement, it's talking about whether people would recommend you as a company, that they would recommend your company to your friends, whether they feel that when they are working there that they feel that they're being heard, not only by their boss but by their peer, and the questions like whether they feel that when they have a point of view that they are being listened to, and that they are actually free to share their point of views. And so I think that things like engagement survey do actually help provide some kind of measurements on things like inclusion, which I know that it's more qualitative versus quantitative, but that does give you a good picture. And then from there, then of course it's important is that if you're going to ask your staff in terms of how they feel, and they give you answer and they tell you they're not happy, you better do something about it. Otherwise, they'll never answer your engagement survey again. So that's what the other part. So after doing the survey, then of course you need to actually do something with it. So that's one of the ways. But I'd love to hear what other people are doing in terms of measuring inclusion.
I think you've touched on a very important point there, that diversity does not equal inclusion. It gets lumped together, but often they're very distinct. So Paul, sorry.
No, thank you. I echo Olivia. We also have an engagement survey, which I think is almost like measuring after the fact. But again, it's hard to from the survey to distinguish between diversity and inclusion. I think there are a couple of things that we're trying. Definitely, first come first is we don't just measure gender. So we take a look at our management committee representation and board representation in terms of ethnicity, for example. So we did a quick look into management committee. For example, we have around 44% Hong Kong Chinese. The rest spread between mainland Chinese, British, American, and Portuguese. So we do have people who are ethnic minority in Hong Kong actually joining the management committee, which is a good news for us. But that is only input driven. So it's not about what we have, but not what we do. Another thing that we very closely looked at is from our HR standpoint, we look at exit interviews all the time. We do analysis on data from exit interviews and see what are the real cause of people leaving or people commenting on that, whether there are any hint, the slightest shade of hint that there are some non-inclusive behaviors that people experience that drive people's attrition or complaints, etc. So I think that will be another data point that we looked at from time to time to make sure that we do the right thing, not be a bystander on any inappropriate behaviors that really driving towards more inclusive behaviors in the organization.
Okay. Well, that actually links into another question that's come up here, which is, although we're obviously thinking about this from a perspective of sort of talent leaders and HR perspective, actually the real part about diversity and inclusion and knowing whether you've been successful is how that's lived out within your organization on a day-to-day basis. And like you mentioned there, Paul, about looking at attrition rates and the reasons behind that, and was that something that was perhaps someone wasn't feeling included. So the question here is, what they'd like you to share your experiences in terms of cultural diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and some of the struggles and challenges of racial inclusion, and what's being done or what can be done to make that a better experience for talent. Right. Paul, I'll come back to you.
Okay, so I'll give you a quick example. So, but the bottom line in Hong Kong is there's still a big population of workforce that they came from the traditional local Chinese background, that they don't ask, don't tell, and try to hide anything in between, don't stick out the head and be hit by others. The culture is still very strong. So we are actually going against the wind of that in most of the locally driven organizations. But one example is, for example, we have some employee in the organization that he is ethnically Indian and he came from Americas. But then people actually always comment and talk behind this person using local language. But the person actually sense that they're talking about him in a non-appreciative way of who he is, not about what he does. So he brought it to his manager, then brought it to human resources. What we did is we don't need to penalize people who actually had that behavior, but we want to tackle it head on and positively. So the recommendation that we gave to the business is we actually host a business town hall. Within that period of time, we talked about the importance of inclusion and diversity in that business. We give examples of what it means to be bad behaviors, what it means to be good behaviors. We don't name and shame people, but people who actually did it, they noticed it, they walked themselves back quietly, but effectively. So instead of creating a kind of bipolar, one against the other kind of dynamics in the team, we create a truly embrace inclusivity in the day-to-day behaviors of people. So we feel that that's actually a better way, instead of name and shame people who did one-off bad things. But of course, we watch clearly and we watch carefully every day. If there are repeated occurrence of such things, we will actually we're not fearing to kind of penalize people and call them out. But at the start, we want to create a truly inclusive approach.
So it was more of a sort of educational and best practice approach rather than focusing on what was done that was wrong. It should be focusing on what people should be doing.
That's right.
I want to come to Tayyab and Tracy, because you yourselves in Hong Kong are ethnic minorities. So what's been your experience of that from the talent perspective, from the talent side? And what advice would you give sort of senior management of organizations, both small and large, in order to help make the workplace more inclusive? So Tayyab, I'll come to you first.
So at EY is a good example in terms of like the kind of initiatives that have been ongoing. So let's take my team as an example. We have a team of around 30 something people with 8 different nationalities, and every project there is a mixture of different nationality people and different races coming together and exchanging ideas. And this policy is also driven by our top management, which take the initiative of D&I initiatives, and that help people to bring the different people together and exchange ideas, involve them into different teams. But looking outward to other organizations, and especially the SME sector, I think there is still a lot of inequality there, where minorities are not given an opportunity to showcase their skills. And this needs to be done from top down in a similar fashion as it is done within EY, where the management drives the policies and implement them. And SMEs also need to think about it from the board of directors level, and then bring these policies in, encourage their teams to be more inclusive. And a big part would be to educate the people that how to include these people who are culturally diverse into your team, how to work with them, and the sort of issues that may arise and how to handle those issues.
And Tracy?
I think, yep, I agree with Tayyab that a lot of these come from top down. But besides top down, I think also knowing how your employees respond to these policies and practices and how they feel about the internal culture is very important. So conducting surveys to check in with employees and how they feel about the culture, how the organization can better support different groups would be good. Or even doing post-hiring questionnaires with employees who recently joined organizations on their hiring or onboarding experience could help show, how easy or difficult it is for employees to initially settle in, how they feel about integrating within the company. So, yep, I agree that a lot of this comes from policy, but I think knowing how employees feel on the ground level is very, very important and plays a big part in how you shape these policies specifically for your company.
Now, thank you so much, Tracy. Now, Jones, you are ethnically in the majority here. You're Chinese. And so I want to get your take on that. How do you view diversity and inclusion? Is there resistance? Do you see resistance to it from the sort of Chinese majority sometimes? You're on mute, Jones, sorry. Just turn your microphone on. Thank you. Great.
Yes, well, I don't see any active resistance from the majority. It's more like they are usually shy. They would need some encouragement to break the ice, to speak with the minority people. And this is why I think from the senior management, they would need to arrange more training or activity or events to to push the majority a little bit, to break the ice, to help them to initiate the conversation. Once they start talking to each other, I think that would most of the majority people are quite friendly to one and each other.
Okay. Now I've linked to what you just said then. I've got a question coming in here from Charis, and it was alluding to what Olivia said earlier as well. D&I, it's a very sort of hot topic, and a lot of the younger generation, it's nothing for them. It's normal. It's something they've grown up with, but it might not be so sort of well known amongst the older generations who might be thinking in a different way. Certainly, there's differences in different ways that people think. It might not just be limited by age, as the question here suggests. It's more about mindset rather than age. But for people who don't get the idea of D&I and haven't really thought about it that much, what do you think we could do to help those mindsets? In the question here, it says the older generation. I'm going to say mindset rather than older generation. But what can we do practically to help them understand this and know the importance of it? What do you think, James?
Well, I think as a junior person, I still need to talk to my senior to bring up how is this important. So sometimes I will recommend some of my friends who do a great job in the field that I do, like engineer. So actually, one of my colleagues from Pakistan is recommended by another junior colleague. So
Okay.
so once the senior management have the opportunity to see they can achieve the same ability as the majority people, they will starting to accept it.
Okay, great. Well, let me come back to Paul and Olivia here, because another criticism is that when people are measuring the metrics of diversity and inclusion, often that's restricted to just the more senior levels in the organization. And another challenge is that often local minority groups are missed out from that altogether. Now, Raymond, in his summary earlier from the EOC study, showed that there is a clear disparity between what ethnic minorities are getting as part of their sort of EVP or IVP in the organization. And they can expect 20% lower median income than the majority of the working population. So something's not working here. So I want to ask both of you, what do you think organizations can do to enhance the diversity and inclusion at junior levels, and also to encourage greater recruitment of local ethnic minorities, even when they have those language barriers that we mentioned earlier in the discussion, that many people may not have good or any Chinese language skills? So I'll come to Olivia first on that one. What do you think can be done?
So I think that firstly is, yes, I agree that often we tend to set targets at the more senior levels, but then I don't think that that should be the case. I mean, often if I look across the SWI group in a different operating company, many of them set targets, actually at every level, because I think one of the key things we got to think about is the pipeline. It's not only because, if you want to get more diverse group into the senior level, you got to have a pipeline first. And so I think, by looking at those, like by setting different targets at every different level, I think that's key. I think secondly, I think, and it's kind of, in a way is also a task that we're actually looking at after we finish reviewing our HR policies. One of the things is, how do we write job description, and what exactly are we asking the kind of skill set that's required. I know that often people will say, well, yes, you would need to be able to read and write Chinese. And when I see those kind of job description right now, I often question, is it really? At what time, at what stage, or what exactly it is that when we're doing that you actually need to read and write Chinese, just so I have a better understanding. And so I think it is up to ourselves. So then one is, as a line manager, we need to challenge that. So when we are asking our HR colleagues to help us to recruit, we need to be very clear and thinking that what exactly kind of skill sets are we looking for? And is, the Chinese language, is it really important? And then I guess secondly is that, one of the things that we do is because, yes, we do have a lot of business that happens to be in China. And if we think that someone is good enough, that, they possess all the skill sets that's required, and they have the desire to actually, I actually want to give it a shot and work in China and see what it's like. Then we say, great, I'll give you a language course and you go and learn to speak Chinese, and then I'll send you to China. And usually we find it one of the easiest way. And we do send a lot of non-Chinese speaking staff to China if they raise their hand and say, yes, I want to give it a shot. And then we'll put them in China, and then we'll give them the intensive language course, and then they just have to make it. And our colleagues in China are very nice, and they'll be very supportive. But I think also as an individual, and I would encourage any of the people that are thinking about this is to say that if you're keen, and you want to work in China, then raise your hand and say, yeah, and I'm going to learn the language and I'll do it. But I think first thing for us, as I said, is that we need to ask is language requirement. And when we say language requirement, I think many of the ethnic minorities, in Hong Kong actually speaks fluent Cantonese. I know I've met many of them. And if you can speak the language, do you really have to read and write? I think that's another question we're going to ask ourselves. So I think those are the kind of things that, we would look at to help, bring in a greater diversity of candidates.
That's a great initiative. How long are those placements when they go to China to work in China?
Oh, it's a few years. So usually, so that means that you have to kind of like bite the bullet and say, all right, I'm gonna, go, and yes, I'm interested, and they have the capability and everything else, and they said, I'm gonna bite the bullet and live in China for a few years, because you can't go to China for 6 months and think you can speak the language fluently. That's just a fact.
It takes about a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, I'm coming to you, but just because this dovetails in so beautifully with this question that I've had in from Basil here, so I'm going to put this one up as well, and we can both think about this. And it says, many ethnic graduates in Hong Kong face struggles in job seeking. Moreover, my perception of D&I initiatives is that they're mostly focused on after the employee's been onboarded. So just like we were talking about there, in terms of helping them with cultural integration and going to China, but they're already in the organization by that stage. So I would like to ask, or Basil would, what D&I initiatives have been done, or what could be done, to encourage more ethnic graduates to apply to the organization, especially those seeking entry-level positions, targeting fresh graduates. Now, Olivia, you already mentioned one idea is that you think, are those language skills really necessary? I'm going to come to Paul and let Olivia have a bit of thinking time on that one. So Paul, can you tell me in terms of your perspective at HKEX, I mean, what's happening there in terms of helping that happen?
Sure. I think I'll answer both questions in one go, Paul. You didn't start by saying that the bias of diversity sometimes focus on the senior people. I would say yes, but also that's actually a strategy. We focus on them because they will be key in driving the initiatives of diversity inclusion across the organization. It's very hard for bottom up to drive that at the beginning. So we strategically actually focus on that level. So that's actually one of the solution on that. But to answer the question, I think it boils down to a number of things. Olivia talked about practices and a little programming that we can support, which we did in HKEX as well. The other two, I would call it, one is about rigor across all levels. And second is you create allies across all levels. So let's talk about the rigor. So it's how HR and also line managers and divisional leadership will ensure all hiring managers have the rigor to consider not just because of how the person looks and also what kind of race and ethnicity the person is, but focus on what's the best skills and talent for that particular job. So to Olivia mentioned, there are definitely some job in Hong Kong that absolutely need Cantonese, but that's not 100% of that. They're probably not even more than 40% of the job that absolutely need Cantonese. So if you true to yourself and you have the rigor to ask the question, do we absolutely need someone who speaks Cantonese? Normally the answer is no. They prefer to have someone like that because it's easy to manage. But as HR, as division leadership, as senior people, you drive that. You make sure the hiring managers apply that rigor to hire when they hire people. Unless they see the right number of talent with diverse and different background, we don't allow them to hire. So that's kind of the rigor that we're talking about. Allies. Sometimes you talk about yourself is not convincing, but you talk about someone else is usually more convincing. So for example, as a local Hong Kong Chinese, I go and say that, no, we cannot just interview local candidates. We have to expand our remit to include other ethnicity, other background. Usually people will hear it, but if we rely on someone who is actually in the ethnical minority population and they shout and scream that we should hire more, normally it won't work as well because people will feel that they're doing it for their own self-interest. So our strategy is also create more allies, not just racial and ethnicity diversity, but actually across all diversity, to make sure that we have spokesperson for them appropriately, and they will actually do it for the greater good of the organization and for the community. So that's kind of another thing that we did.
Great. Okay, well, we've got another question coming up here. Olivia, do you want to add any more in terms of the helping to recruit more people?
No, I mean, I agree absolutely with what Paul said, and I think that rigor is very important. I think the ally, especially, I agree, because I think, yes, often, you look at, and we talked about, usually it's easier, you have like a lot of places have women's network, for example, but I think, that's because, it's gender is usually the easier one, right? But I think that ally is really the key. If you actually have strong allies supporting variety of diversity group, and then work together with the actual employee resource group of that, whether it's championing in terms of ethnic inclusion or LGBT plus, if you actually have, and then you work together with that particular in terms of network, the employee network group, then actually, it's the sum of the total is far greater. And so I think that would be, definitely key, to look at how to get greater inclusion of different talents.
Right, okay. And I'm gonna switch to this question here from Yan. It says, what would be a good starting point for predominantly local Chinese organizations, of which there were quite a few in Hong Kong, those without many opportunities to interact with groups or people from different cultures, to become more appreciative of D&I policies? So what can a company that doesn't have much exposure, so I'm not going to talk to Olivia and Paul on this one, I'm going to talk to some of the smaller organizations, so I'm going to get Jones, Taya, Tracy, your take on this one. What do you think personally? You can share your own experiences of what's been successful, and also you can share your advice as well as to what should be done and what works well to create better sort of employee experiences and more interaction in terms of diversity and inclusion. So Tracy, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think it depends. So if your organization is very local, it doesn't have any exposure, starting off can be quite difficult. You need some kind of push, and that has to come internally, that no matter what kind of external exposure is happening, as long as there's no one internally pushing for it, it's not really going to happen. But starting it off internally, I think, starts with dedicating resources that are focused on D&I, because a lot of companies still see it as something that happens on the side. It's not a main focus in terms of hiring practices. A lot of times it's just about external representation and not really about how you're really impacting employees and internal culture. So in that sense, dedicating some resources that are looking into hiring practices and internal culture, organizing events that can really boost diversity within the company, that would really help. I think if you, in terms of external exposure though, I don't think you can really do much until someone really pushes internally.
And you say about this pushing internally, whose job is that? Is it the CEO? Is it the board? Is it HR? Is it the employees? Who should be doing that pushing?
Everyone. I think it should be everyone, but I think employees, they can only have so much of an impact. What they say matters, but they can't actively make a change on their own. HR, it should be part of their practices to be hiring people that would facilitate a more diverse environment. But mostly without the higher management approval, a lot of these things can't be done. So while everyone should be focused on these initiatives, I think, yeah, unfortunately, all of this push should be coming from top down.
Okay.
In addition to what Tracy mentioned, I just think that we can also, as minorities, take the initiative as well. Like what we have done at like EY provide us a lot of opportunities and platforms. So what we have done is we brought the minorities, different racially diverse cultural groups together and set up a cultural diversity network. And where we are going with this is we have three objectives with this. We want to build a culturally diverse workforce that is inward looking. The second one is to enable cultural sharing and raise the awareness of cultural differences among our EY people. And then finally, we want to look outward and then foster our community engagement and by engaging with NGOs, schools, and universities, especially where there are minorities studying, and then encourage them and show them that, okay, these are the minority professionals that are already in the industry. You can be one of them. You just need to follow these certain steps and guide them throughout their school process so that they can eventually be able to get on board with a good career.
And that cultural diversity network, how is that communicated? Is that something you put on the notice board? Is it circular? Is it town hall meeting?
And so we have regular meetings around cultural diversity with the team of Cultural Diversity Network. So how it all started is we have this Zubin Foundation event last year organized by our D&I network team. And they invited a lot of different minority professionals and asked them to do the sharing. There were over 150 people were there. So we came up with some of us from EY were there as well. So we came up with the idea that, okay, we need to do something similar to that and look inward as well as outward to make an impact. And so we prepare a proposal for our senior management to look at, and they were very pleased with the whole proposal. And then they look at it, they think this is a very good initiative. We got their backing, and they want us to go ahead. They give us ideas on how we can improve all of this. And now what we are doing is scheduling the activities. We have a calendar of activities that we're going to go throughout the year. And we're hoping that, so we're going to, the three areas I mentioned earlier, our activity is going to target each three of them. And with those activities, we're hoping to build a stronger bond.
Now, being a skeptic, I would imagine that the type of people that would want to join that diversity and inclusion network are already quite D&I savvy. They are already quite diverse in terms of who joins it. But the people who are not thinking in a diverse way or in an inclusive way would be less inclined to join that network, but may still be working for larger organizations. How is that true? And if so, how do you reach out to the people who don't feel inclined to join that D&I network?
And so the way I think we should be doing it is making it open for everyone. You don't necessarily have to join the network to be part of it. You can take part in, for example, one activity that you think is closely related to you. And with EY being an organization where there are over 3,000 people in Hong Kong, and a lot of them, each and every team, most of them have minorities working in it. So somehow, one way or another, you would be connected with one part of minority or another. So, for example, if we have this day to celebrate the different cultures. So if you are exposed to Japanese culture, then you would be coming into looking at our Japanese culture booth. But then in addition to that, we would be hosting Korean, other Indian, Pakistani, other cultures booth as well. So while you are walking through that, you would be exposed to, okay, oh, this is what happened in Pakistani culture. This is what happened in Indian culture. So that's how your awareness by joining these kind of events will increase.
Okay, Jones, just going to get your take on that one.
Yeah, to promote diversity, I think I agree with Tracy. We really need to do it internally, especially for a small startup as NISI. And this is why we need a group to actively think about what to do. And so we have not only we have a committee to review the policy, and we also have a town hall meeting to include anyone to come up with ideas to give to the actually everyone. One of the suggestions that we get is to host some culture day for anyone who's come from different background, Japanese, Canadian, or India, to talk about their culture on that day to educate everyone. So sometimes people would not actively learn about it. So it would be nice for everyone to share about their culture.
I think something I hear resonating in what everyone said there is you don't actually have to label any of these activities as D&I activities, and perhaps it's better not to label them as that sometimes, but it's just about making a variety of activities and a variety of formats that's open to everybody, and that can help get different people mixing together from different cultures, so there is that exchange. Now, the problem with working in corporates, or the challenge, is that sometimes you need to measure this. You need to actually give some metrics for this. You can't just say that we have these initiatives and it's all going very well. So this question coming in now, there's another one from Simeon actually. I find diversity targets difficult to explain. Diversity experts are saying that this is key to overcoming unconscious bias, but a common reaction isn't that discrimination itself committing to target hiring from a particular gender or ethnic groups. Isn't it that happens? I wonder if the panel has any experience to share on diversity targets. So have any of you had to get involved in the reporting of this or having to meet certain diversity targets? Paul, you're nodding your head, and Olivia. So I'll come to Paul first.
Personally, and also organizationally, we don't believe in targets. So targets, there's a lot of debate actually in the corporate community about whether we should set target or not. You can find success stories or failure stories. Success stories is you achieve the target, that you kind of pat on your back and so that you have done a great job. But the success stories is that you almost like go in one direction, but you violate your own policy or your own practices on meritocracy. And then some people will challenge you. Why do you do this? So my experience is we should have a goal. We should have a stretch goal every year. It's not a hard target we want to do, but to have a stretch goal, that means that we will do something in our day-to-day practice to move towards that goal, but without saying that we must achieve that. So actually, my experience find it that's much more useful to do this. This is one, make it a mainstream discussion rather than a kind of a fixated target. But second, it increased gradually the rigor and across the organization of doing the right things rather than doing it for the sake of having a target. So that's kind of my experience in the past.
Great. And Olivia, what would you like to add to that?
Well, actually, we set target, and I would argue. So to me, I always look at this as semantic, right? So it's kind of like before it was quota versus target. Oh, quota is not good, but target, oh, maybe we should talk about target. I mean, ultimately, what it is we're really saying is that, for example, we know that, in order to be successful, whether it is in business or in anything, that, you need to have a diverse group. And whatever that looks like should represent hopefully the population that you happen to be in that particular geography, right? So we do set target. And the reason we set target, our argument is that, well, it's similar to like, running a business, right? You set a target every year in terms of what you need to achieve on your revenue target. And why do you set it? So yes, ideally is that you would like to meet and exceed it. But if you don't, you need to review and understand why. And I think, but you need to have something to shoot for. So the way that when we set target, it was really just to say that, you know what, we know that we are not there. We know that we can do better, and we want to shoot for something. And so therefore we set a target. And so that's how we look at target generally. And we think it is helpful because also in some ways, same thing, like, I keep going back to revenue targets because I grew up with revenue targets, right? Is that you kind of hold your feet to the fire and say, you better meet your target because otherwise you got a lot of explaining to do. And, and then you try the best that you can, but, sometimes you won't be able to make it, but then, you review. And so I think it's really just kind of having that sort of accountability, maybe, maybe you don't need a target to have accountability, but I think that having a target help you to understand what you need to be accountable for and where you need to strive to. So we do actually have that. And of course, you also want to be able to, kind of having that and kind of explain and talk about the stories that you have in terms of helping you to be more inclusive and helping you to achieve, whatever that you set out to do, to be the best organization possible and being the most inclusive workplace possible. So I think those are the kind of things that we will look at.
Now, you mentioned at the beginning there, Olivia, that you'd moved from quota to target. Am I right in assuming that a quota must be met, but a target is a goal that doesn't have to be met? Is that the key difference between those two terms?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was we never set a quota, but that was the original discussion. Should we set a quota or should we set a target? And I think quota, often people look at what happened in Scandinavia, right? So like they have the gender quota. And people always get the sense is, oh, you're not deserving enough. And that's, I mean, I would argue is it's just that it appears that way because that's how we tend to explain it nowadays, is having a quota, meaning that people may not be deserving. And then so we said, okay, let's use a language where generally, if you're in a business, you would have things like target, right? So then therefore it's not meaning that you shouldn't meet it. Of course you should go and try to meet it, but it's just, again, going back to setting some kind of goals. I guess going back to what Paul said, is some kind of goals, right? You got to have a goal. You got to kind of know, where do I want to get to eventually? And so, so I guess, I would say it doesn't matter what language you use, like whatever makes you happy, as long as you know that you got to get someplace where you got to be better tomorrow than you are today. And you got to look at this every single day. Then you can call it anything you want.
Okay. Well, because we couldn't hear Paul very well at the beginning, so we're going to allow a few minutes at the end just to come back to Paul, and you can do a rewind, and it'll be nice to do a summary at the end of this, actually, of your sharing at the beginning. But before we do that, I'm going to just come to everybody now to get your sort of, this is your nugget of advice for senior management, okay? So imagine you have the elevator pitch now, you've got the CEO in there, or you've got the head of HR in there, or the people who are really driving diversity and inclusion in organizations. What would you say to them in sort of 30 seconds to a minute max? What would you say to, because the lift isn't very long, okay? What would you say to them as to how to improve? What would be the best way of improving D&I culture within the organization? Okay, I'm going to start with Jones because he's not expecting me to go to him first. So Jones, I'm going to start with you. What would you say to them?
I would suggest when you're expanding a company, you will need to include as many nationalities as possible, as diverse as possible. So I would suggest to expand the interview panels when doing the recruitment process. So usually only the HR manager or the line manager would interview the candidate. But I think it's good if we can include more people from different backgrounds, even though they are not a direct senior of that position. It is interesting to hear other people's advices. I think that would help to recruit more people in the company.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant point there. And I think that just because you have HR in your title. Often they don't know anything about the jobs that people are actually going to do, and the line manager or someone who's done that job before would be far better placed to understand the culture that's required in there. So definitely having a diverse recruitment panel, great idea, Jones. Thank you. I'll come to Paul now on that one.
Wow, I didn't expect that. Okay, I would say if there's an elevator there, I'll start by saying is the CEO standing there next to me. I'll say diversity is a success factor of all that we do. I'll suggest us to consider to do it, not just because it's the right thing to do, even I truly believe in it, but it is for this company, it is for our stakeholder, it's also for our people. If we do it right, we will have a better company, we will have better suite of people across the organization, and we service our customers and stakeholders much better.
Great, thank you. Tayeb?
So, yes, similar to Paul, I would simply say that, yeah, there are a lot of minorities out there that have talent. Give them an opportunity. You don't have to treat them with we don't have to provide them any special kind of treatment. Just treat them equally like everyone else. Give them opportunity and see what they can do for you. And then there are already many studies out there that are saying that teams that are diversified, and those companies perform better with diversified teams. So there's a need to set the tone. Management need to set that tone from top down and encourage their teams to embrace the diversity.
Great. Tracy, that elevator shaft just got shorter.
I think it's quite similar to what everyone said so far. It's really about focusing on the benefits that diversity can bring, that we need to look over the potential disadvantages of hiring diversity, because having a more diverse group means you can have better discussions, you can have more perspectives. And, you know, essentially that's what we are. Like, as corporations, we need to have the best representation. We need to attract clients who, you know, who are from all over the world. So we need to be catering to a lot of different types of people. So having a more diverse group within your organization can really help build an image and cater to a lot of different people.
Great.
So yeah,
we're at the floor. Okay, Olivia, last one. You got 20 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. So because we're talking about racial diversity charter, so I would say one thing, if the CEO is next to me now, is don't ever say that you're colorblind. Because when you're colorblind, that means you are not seeing color. That means you do not understand the concept of race and culture. We need to open our eyes and see color. And then from there, understand the differences and learn the respect and the inclusive behavior that's required to recognize the beautiful rainbow of color. And that's what I would say.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad we ended on a rainbow. I'm going to pass back to Huma now, because I know we are hideously short of time.